Welcome, everyone, to our deep dive into teenagers.
The teenage years.
Yeah, we're going to be focusing on Matilda Gosling's book, Teenagers, The Evidence Base.
Oh, great choice.
Yeah, it's a great book. It's jam-packed with research.
It is.
All about teenagers and
Yeah.
really challenges a lot of assumptions that we have
Right.
about teenagers. And so we're hoping that this deep dive today will kind of equip you with a deeper understanding of what teenagers are going through
Mm-hmm.
and how we can maybe better connect with the teenagers in our lives.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting how adolescence is often so misunderstood.
Oh, for sure.
And so this book and this deep dive will, I think, give a fresh perspective
Absolutely.
based on real research,
Yeah,
evidence,
exactly.
not just opinion.
So let's jump right in and let's start by addressing this idea of storm and stress.
Okay.
Right. That's kind of like the classic
Stereotype, right?
stereotype of teenagers is that they're just like completely turbulent and difficult and
Hormonal.
hormonal and all over the place.
Yeah.
Is that really true? Is that really what the research suggests?
Well, not quite. I
Okay.
mean, obviously, hormonal shifts and emotional changes are happening.
Sure.
But what Gosling kind of shows us is that actually healthy development doesn't have to mean constant turbulence and stress and all the rest of it.
Okay.
In fact, most teenagers are going through this phase with a lot more positivity
Okay.
than we often give them credit for.
That's really reassuring to hear.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's good to know, but we can't deny that teenagers are often associated with risk-taking behavior.
Sure. Yeah.
So what's the science behind that? Why are teenagers so drawn to risky choices?
Well, it comes down to their brains.
Okay.
Teenage brains are still developing,
Right.
particularly the prefrontal cortex.
And that's the part that controls.
That's the part of the brain that's responsible for judgment and impulse control.
Okay, so like that's not fully developed yet.
No, not fully developed till later.
Gotcha.
And so this gap that Gosling talks about where their physical development
Okay.
is outpacing their cognitive maturity
Okay.
can lead to this kind of thirst for independence
Sure.
that sometimes comes out as risky choices.
So it's like their brains are wired for excitement,
Right.
but the brakes aren't quite installed yet.
Exactly.
Okay, that's a great analogy. So is that drive for independence then at the root of a lot of those parent-teenager clashes?
It can be.
Okay.
Teenagers aren't necessarily rejecting you as a parent personally.
Personally, right.
They are trying to assert their autonomy, which
Okay.
is a really important developmental step.
Right.
And an interesting thing is that research shows that actually parent-teenager relationships often deteriorate a bit in the early teen years,
Oh, really?
but then they tend to bounce back later on.
Oh, so there's light at the end of the tunnel.
Yeah, exactly.
For parents going through those early teen years.
There is hope.
Okay. I love that. I love that message. So speaking of connections, let's talk about friendships.
Okay.
What role do friendships play in a teenager's life?
Well, they're absolutely vital.
Okay.
Friendships during adolescence give teenagers this real sense of belonging. They give them support and even protection against negative outcomes.
Oh, wow.
Sometimes even more so than family.
Really? So it's like their own little network that's helping them navigate all the changes and the challenges.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
But it's interesting because the way that boys and girls approach friendship can be quite different.
Oh, how so?
Well, boys tend to kind of bond over activities, doing things together, whereas girls often favor these very intimate conversations.
Okay.
And Gosling calls this co-rumination,
rumination.
where they, extensively discuss their problems together,
Okay.
which can be beneficial,
Sure.
but can also be linked to mental health issues.
So too much girl talk can backfire.
It can if it's excessive.
That's an interesting concept.
Yeah.
Okay, so speaking of complex emotions,
Yeah.
we can't avoid the topic of love and desire
Right.
in a
Yeah.
teenager's life.
Right.
So how does that all play out?
Well, desire really emerges as this powerful force during adolescence. It's fueled by biology,
Sure.
social influences, values, all combined.
Right.
And I think it's important to remember that those first crushes and those teenage romances,
Mm.
they're not just frivolous distractions.
Right.
They actually play a really crucial role in shaping their identity,
Okay.
their relationships with their friends and family, learning to manage those really intense emotions.
So it's like a crash course in relationships.
Yeah, you could say that.
Okay. And what about that whole playing hard to get thing? Is there any scientific basis for that?
There might be.
Really?
There are studies that suggest that we are naturally drawn to people
Okay.
who we perceive as valuable or selective,
Okay.
which maybe triggers something subconsciously. It's a
Interesting.
fascinating area.
So there's a science behind all those dating rituals.
Perhaps.
Okay, well, let's switch gears a little bit and talk about a topic that I know sparks a lot of debate these days, the online world
Okay.
and its impact on teenagers.
Sure.
So what does the research say about screen time,
Yeah.
social media, all of that?
Well, it's complex, as you can imagine.
Sure.
Gosling kind of acknowledges both the benefits and the risks.
Right.
But I think it's impossible to ignore the reality that the average teenager is spending about 8.5 hours a day
Wow.
in front of a screen.
That's a lot.
That's excluding schoolwork.
Wow.
Mhm.
Okay, so that raises some concerns
Yeah, absolutely.
about the potential negative impact
Right.
on their mental health,
Mm-hmm.
their sleep,
Sure.
maybe even physical well-being.
Yeah.
Okay, so while connecting online can be incredibly valuable,
Mm,
finding that balance is key.
right.
But what are some of the specific risks that we should be aware of as parents or people who work with teenagers?
Well, I think one thing is the concern about social contagion.
Social contagion, what is that?
So this is where unhealthy behaviors or ideas can spread very rapidly online.
Oh, so it's like digital peer pressure.
Yeah, exactly. Like a digital version of peer pressure,
Okay.
which can obviously amplify negative outcomes.
Right, because things spread so much faster online.
Exactly.
Right, okay. Anything else?
Well, another worry is the impact of these idealized images and unrealistic expectations, often perpetuated online,
Of course.
which can really contribute to body dissatisfaction, mental health issues.
Okay.
Gosling even mentions this phenomenon
Okay.
called mass social media-induced illness.
Mass social media-induced illness.
Their anxieties and symptoms are spreading
Wow.
through these online communities.
That's a scary thought.
Yeah.
Okay, well, let's move on then to another topic that we've all heard a lot about, the rising rates of mental health issues in teenagers. Is this a cause for widespread alarm, or is it more nuanced than that?
It's definitely more nuanced.
Yeah.
Mental health challenges are increasing, there's no doubt.
Yeah.
But I think it's really important to acknowledge that actually the vast majority of teenagers are coping well.
Okay, that's good to hear.
Yeah, Gosling really emphasizes that healthy development is the norm, not the exception.
Okay.
However, there are some concerning findings
Okay.
about interventions.
Oh.
Studies suggest that some school-based mental health programs can actually backfire
Backfire.
if they're not carefully targeted,
Wow.
leading to negative labeling and lowered self-esteem.
Oh, so raising awareness is vital,
Yes,
but a nuanced approach is essential.
exactly. Individualized support
Right.
and sensitivity are crucial.
Yeah, we don't want to just apply those blanket solutions.
No.
That might do more harm than good.
Exactly.
Okay. And this kind of leads us to another topic that I think is quite complex and often controversial. And that is gender identity.
Right.
So this is a subject that's generating a lot of discussion,
A lot of opinion.
strong opinions.
Yeah.
What insights does Gosling offer on this topic?
Well, she presents a balanced perspective. She acknowledges that there are a diverse range of beliefs surrounding gender identity,
Of course.
but she also highlights the lack of conclusive evidence
Okay.
supporting the benefits of social or medical transition for children.
Okay.
She emphasizes that there are potential risks
What-
with early intervention.
Okay.
And she also points out that many gender-questioning teens actually have these underlying vulnerabilities,
Such as?
mental health conditions, autism, or past trauma.
Okay, so approaching these situations with empathy
Yes.
and caution.
And really relying on evidence-based information.
Right, relying on the evidence.
Yeah,
Okay,
yeah.
so that's a really important message. Okay, well, let's shift gears a little bit and talk about building resilience and self-esteem. Because these are obviously crucial skills for navigating adolescence.
Absolutely.
So what does the research tell us about fostering these qualities in teenagers?
Well, Gosling draws this fascinating parallel with a study on monkeys.
Monkeys.
Yeah, so these monkeys
Okay.
were exposed to mild stress early in life. And what they found was that those monkeys actually showed greater resilience
Really?
and curiosity.
So a little bit of adversity can be beneficial.
Yeah, it suggests that manageable challenges can strengthen individuals.
Wow, that's a thought-provoking idea.
Yeah.
What else contributes to resilience in teenagers?
Well, having a strong sense of purpose
Okay.
and a future-oriented mindset are really important.
So helping them discover their passions
Yes,
and envision their future.
exactly.
Okay, so that can be really empowering.
It can.
And what about self-esteem? How can we boost self-esteem in our teenagers?
Well, parents can play a huge role in this
How so?
by encouraging practices like gratitude journaling, engaging in meaningful activities,
Right.
recognizing their teenagers' unique strengths.
So it's about nurturing their confidence
Yes,
and helping them recognize their own worth.
exactly.
Okay. But as we move towards preparing teenagers for adulthood,
Hmm.
what role does allowing them to make mistakes play?
That's a really important one.
Okay.
Allowing teenagers to stumble
Right.
and learn from their missteps is crucial.
Okay.
Mistakes are inevitable,
Yeah, of course.
and they provide these invaluable learning opportunities.
So instead of shielding them from every potential pitfall,
Right.
we should create an environment where they feel safe to experiment,
Exactly.
knowing that they have our support even when they mess up.
Yeah.
Right? So creating that safe space
Mhm.
for them to learn and develop their own decision-making skills.
Yeah.
That makes sense. What about critical thinking skills?
Okay.
How do we equip them with the ability to, navigate this increasingly complex world?
Well, Gosling suggests fostering critical thinking at home by encouraging them to question assumptions,
Mhm.
consider diverse viewpoints.
Okay.
Even simple things like analyzing news reports
Okay.
as a family.
As a family, right? Interesting.
And mentoring relationships can also play a really big role here.
Okay, so expanding their network of support,
Yeah.
providing opportunities for growth
Mm,
outside of the family dynamic.
exactly.
Makes sense. Um, okay, so before we wrap up this segment, let's address the age-old debate about chores and paid work.
Okay.
Um, do these things truly contribute to a teenager's development?
The research actually suggests they do.
Really?
Both chores
Okay.
and paid work can be really beneficial.
In what way?
Well, chores instill that sense of responsibility and
Alright.
contribution
Do the shared space.
to a shared space, exactly.
Ah.
While paid work
Mhm.
teaches them about time management,
Yep.
financial literacy,
Right.
the importance of showing up and doing your best.
Well, it's like a real-world boot camp for adulthood.
Exactly.
Okay. So this has been an incredible exploration of
Yeah.
a teenage world.
It
We've
has.
covered so much,
We have.
from brain development to social dynamics.
It's fascinating.
It is fascinating. What stands out to you from this initial dive?
I think I'm just really struck by the sheer depth and complexity
Yeah.
of adolescent development.
For sure.
I think we often oversimplify it.
We do.
But Gosling's research really highlights how intricate
Yeah.
it is, this interplay
Right.
of biological, social, and emotional factors.
Absolutely.
It's fascinating.
It is. And I really appreciate the emphasis on moving beyond that stereotypical storm and stress
Yeah.
model
Yeah.
towards something much more nuanced.
More realistic.
Yeah.
More balanced.
Exactly.
Mm.
So before we move on to the next part of our deep dive,
Mm.
I think it would be helpful to distill
Okay.
some of these insights into a concise
Mm-hmm.
10-point summary
Okay, I like it.
of key takeaways
Let's do it.
from Gosling's book.
Yes.
So are you ready?
Ready.
All right, number 1, the storm and stress model.
Is a myth.
It's a myth. Teenage development is far more intricate than that.
Absolutely.
Number 2, teenage brains are still developing,
Particularly the prefrontal cortex.
leading to that maturity gap
You're right.
that can influence their decision-making
Mm-hmm.
and their behavior.
For sure.
Number 3, parent-teenager relationship.
Are dynamic.
They're
Oh,
dynamic
and often improve
after the early teen years.
after those early years.
So hang in there, parents.
Exactly.
Number 4, friendships,
Are crucial,
offering support,
belonging,
Reason-
and even protection against negative outcomes.
sometimes more so than family.
Yeah, that's a powerful thought, number 5.
Love and dating serve important developmental functions.
Helping teenagers navigate those complex emotions
Mm.
and build those relationships.
Absolutely.
Number 6, screen time and social media.
Present both opportunities and risks.
They do impacting everything from mental health
to social interactions.
To social interactions, number 7, mental health issues.
are increasing.
Yeah.
Most teenagers are coping well.
Most teenagers are coping well.
And interventions should be targeted and sensitive.
To avoid those unintended consequences.
Exactly.
Number 8, gender identity.
Is a complex and sensitive topic.
Requiring a careful...
On evidence
Yeah.
and individual needs.
Number 9, resilience.
Can be built.
Through experiencing manageable challenges
Developing a sense of purpose.
and cultivating healthy self-esteem.
Absolutely.
And lastly, number 10,
Equipping teenagers for adulthood.
involves fostering responsibility
Critical thinking.
and allowing them to learn from their mistakes
Yeah, create a supportive environment
where they can thrive.
where they can thrive.
That's a lot to process,
It is.
but it's incredibly valuable information for anyone who interacts with teenagers.
I think so.
It offers us a fresh perspective.
And some really practical insights.
Yeah, and some really practical insights. So before we move on to the next part of our deep dive, we'd like you to consider this. If you could give one piece of advice to your teenage self, what would it be? Take some time to reflect on this and perhaps even discuss it with the teenagers in your life. It's a great way to spark a conversation and share wisdom from your own journey.
I love that. I think reflecting on our past selves can be a really interesting way to learn more about our present selves.
That's a great point. So let's delve a bit deeper into the physical transformations of adolescence,
Okay.
specifically puberty,
Puberty.
right? The time of growth spurts and hormonal roller coasters,
All the fun stuff.
all the fun stuff. So what does the latest research tell us about this pivotal stage?
One of the interesting things is that the onset of puberty seems to be happening earlier
Earlier.
with each generation.
Really?
So girls are getting their periods at a younger age,
Oh.
and boys' voices are changing sooner.
So those puberty timelines we learned in health class
Might need an update.
might need a little updating. Okay.
Yeah, a recent British study found that girls, on average,
Okay.
begin menstruating around 12 and a half,
Wow.
and boys' voices change around 13 and a half.
That does seem younger than I recall.
Yeah.
But of course, there's always individual variation.
Yeah, of course, some develop earlier, some develop later.
So variations are normal.
Absolutely.
Okay, good to know. So as teenagers go through these physical changes, what are some of the distinctions that emerge between genders?
Well, a lot of it comes down to hormonal fluctuations,
Right.
particularly testosterone.
Right.
So boys develop greater muscle and bone density,
Okay.
which leads to increased height and strength
Compared to girls.
compared to girls.
Okay, and didn't testosterone also influence brain development?
It does. It impacts the social and emotional aspects of brain development.
Okay, so could that then contribute to those stereotypical notions we have about boys being more physically assertive?
It's possible there's some evidence to support that,
Okay.
but it's important to remember that we're talking about averages here.
Sure.
Individual personalities and experiences play a huge role.
Of course.
And we can't forget about cultural norms and expectations.
Right. Culture shapes how teenagers express themselves.
Absolutely.
Especially when it comes to their changing bodies.
Yeah.
So how does body image factor into all of this?
Well, body image becomes a really big concern during puberty.
Okay.
Research shows that as teenagers undergo these physical changes, they become increasingly self-conscious
About their appearance?
about their appearance.
Right. It's like they suddenly see themselves through a new lens,
Yeah.
constantly comparing themselves to others.
Exactly. And gender plays a role here as well.
In what way?
Well, girls are often pressured to be slender,
Right.
while boys feel the need to be muscular and tall.
So those unattainable beauty standards we see in the media,
They get amplified
they get amplified.
during this vulnerable stage.
Okay, so it's not just the physical transformations themselves,
Right.
but how teenagers perceive those changes. That really matters. Okay, so what can parents do to foster a positive body image in their teenagers?
Well, first of all, avoid talking about weight.
Okay.
Both your teenager's weight and your own weight.
Interesting. Okay.
Shift the focus from appearance to functionality.
Functionality.
So emphasize what their bodies can do
Okay.
rather than how they look.
So instead of praising thinness, we should be highlighting athleticism, strength, overall well-being.
Exactly. Encourage them to engage in activities that celebrate physical capabilities
Okay.
rather than just aesthetics.
So it's about helping them challenge those negative thoughts and those comparisons,
It is.
and equipping them with the tools to filter out those harmful messages from media and peers.
Absolutely. And remember, parental modeling is so important.
So if we're constantly criticizing our own bodies or, obsessing over weight, they're going to pick up on that.
The will. Teenagers are always watching.
Right. So it's about demonstrating self-acceptance
Mm-hmm.
and a healthy relationship with our own bodies.
Mm.
Okay. Speaking of sensitive topics, let's address sexual harassment.
Okay.
This is where those gender differences become particularly prominent.
Yeah, they do studies show that girls are far more likely to experience sexual harassment and assault than boys.
Which is a stark reminder of the gender inequalities that still exist
Absolutely.
in our society.
Yeah, and what's concerning is that both genders
Okay.
actually become more tolerant
More tolerant.
of sexual harassment as they mature.
So it becomes normalized as part of the teenage experience.
Sadly, for some, it does.
Okay.
And I think cultural influences, like the media,
Yeah.
often portraying women in a very objectified manner,
Right.
contribute to this normalization.
So those video games and movies that objectify women,
They can have real-world repercussions.
they can. Okay.
Yeah, there's evidence that suggests a correlation between consuming media with sexualized female characters
Okay.
and increased acceptance of rape myths.
That's alarming.
It's
So this underscores the need for media literacy and critical thinking
Absolutely.
to promote healthy sexual attitudes and behaviors.
For sure.
Okay, so how can parents address sexual harassment with their teenagers?
Well, I think it starts with challenging those gender stereotypes
Yeah.
that fuel this culture of harassment.
Right.
So helping boys understand that masculinity doesn't equal dominance or aggression.
And girls need to know that their worth isn't tied to their appearance
Exactly.
or their compliance with societal expectations
It's about cultivating respect, empathy, and healthy boundaries.
in every relationship.
In every relationship. Oh,
And we can't shy away from those difficult discussions
no.
about consent and sexual assault,
Absolutely. Those conversations are crucial.
even though they might be uncomfortable.
They are, but teenagers need accurate information.
About consent.
Healthy relationships,
Yeah.
the potential dangers of sexual harassment.
And it's not just about telling them what to avoid.
Right.
It's about empowering them to advocate for themselves.
Yes.
Establish boundaries.
Seek help if they need it.
Right. And we as adults need to model those behaviors.
Absolutely.
If we witness harassment,
We need to intervene.
we need to intervene, not turn a blind eye.
Exactly. We need to create this culture
Oh,
of
yeah.
accountability and support.
Where harassment is never tolerated.
Never tolerate
And
that.
teenagers feel empowered to speak out against harmful norms.
Exactly.
Okay, so navigating those physical and social shifts of adolescence,
It can be tough.
it can be tough, but open communication,
Mhm.
supportive relationships, and critical thinking skills can really help teenagers thrive.
For sure, it's about recognizing the challenges,
Right.
but also embracing the incredible potential.
That this phase of life offers.
Exactly.
Okay, so let's turn our attention now to risk-taking behavior,
Okay.
a topic that I think is often met with a lot of apprehension,
A lot of fear.
a
Right.
lot of anxiety.
So how do we find that balance between fostering independence
Right.
and ensuring safety?
Yeah, it's a tough one. What drives teenagers towards risky behavior? Is it just hormones?
Well, hormones play a part,
Okay.
but it's more complicated than that.
Okay.
Remember that developing prefrontal cortex,
The one that's responsible for.
judgment and impulse control.
Okay, so their brains are wired for thrills,
Mm-hmm.
but their judgment is still under construction.
Exactly. And then you add in the maturity gap,
The maturity gap being.
where teenagers want those adult experiences,
Right.
but they don't yet have the maturity
To handle them.
to handle them responsibly.
Right. And we can't forget about peer pressure.
Oh, huge factor.
Right. So fitting in becomes paramount, even if it means compromising their safety.
For many teenagers, that's the reality.
Now,
They're not doing it because they want to.
they're doing it because
You're afraid of being ostracized.
of being left out.
Exactly.
Okay. And what about dopamine, that feel-good brain chemical?
Dopamine that fuels our reward system.
Okay.
And studies show that teenagers actually experience heightened sensitivity to dopamine.
So they get a bigger rush from those thrill-seeking activities.
They do. It's more intense for them.
Okay. So we've got underdeveloped impulse control, peer pressure, a supercharged reward system.
A potent cocktail.
No wonder teenagers sometimes make questionable choices.
It's a recipe for risk-taking.
But it's important to remember that not all risk-taking is bad.
Right. Absolutely not all risk-taking is detrimental.
So how can risk-taking actually be beneficial for teenagers?
Well, healthy risk-taking involves exploring new experiences,
Okay.
pushing boundaries a little bit,
Mm-hmm.
cultivating self-efficacy.
So it's about learning to assess and manage risks,
Exactly.
not avoid them entirely.
Right. Instead of trying to eliminate risk,
We should empower teenagers.
to make informed choices.
Okay, so what are some strategies that parents can use to navigate this world of risk-taking safely?
Well, open communication is so important.
Okay.
Talk to your teenager
About.
about the dangers associated with certain activities,
Right.
but also emphasize the benefits of those calculated risks.
So engaging in dialogue, exploring those nuances,
Exactly.
rather than just issuing blanket prohibitions.
Right, because teenagers are more receptive when they feel heard and respected.
That makes sense. And what about parental modeling?
Oh, huge.
Right. So if we're engaging in reckless behavior ourselves,
They're going to notice.
we're going to pick up on that.
Yeah, we have to practice what we preach.
Right. And be mindful of the messages we're sending.
Both verbally and non-verbally.
Okay. So let's get into some specifics now
Right.
about those risky behaviors that teenagers often engage in.
Okay.
Let's start with alcohol and drugs.
Okay, well, it's important to acknowledge that the drug landscape has changed.
How so?
Well, since today's parents were teenagers,
Right.
the types of drugs that teenagers are experimenting with are different.
Okay.
So the use of illicit drugs like heroin and cocaine
Mm-hmm.
has actually declined among teens.
Really?
Yeah, but we're seeing a surge in the misuse of prescription medication, like
Right.
amphetamines and opioids,
Right. So these medications that are intended for legitimate medical use
are being diverted.
for recreational purposes.
Exactly.
And that's concerning because,
These drugs are highly addictive
right,
and dangerous
when used improperly,
when used improperly.
and teenagers might perceive them as safer
They do.
than street drugs.
They think, oh, it's a prescription, it must be safe.
Right.
But that's a dangerous misconception.
So how can parents tackle this issue with their teenagers?
Well, once again, open and honest dialogue is key.
Okay.
Talk to them about the risks associated with prescription drug misuse.
Emphasizing that even doctor-prescribed medications can be harmful when abused,
Exactly.
and we need to secure any medications at home
I thought
that
that's
could be
it.
misused.
Safe storage
Right.
and proper disposal are really important.
Okay.
Oh.
What about underage drinking?
Still a problem, unfortunately.
Really?
While rates have dipped slightly,
Okay.
still a significant concern.
Well, the dangers of alcohol poisoning and alcohol-related accidents are well documented.
They are, and teenagers are particularly vulnerable
To alcohol's effects
to alcohol's effects.
because of their developing brains and bodies.
Exactly.
And binge drinking can have lasting consequences.
It can. It can also increase the likelihood of them engaging in other risky behaviors, like unprotected sex
Okay.
or driving under the influence.
So it's like a chain reaction.
It can be.
That can lead to some really serious consequences.
Exactly.
Okay. So it's important to address alcohol use directly with teenagers.
It is.
So what are some effective communication strategies for parents?
We'll start by setting clear expectations and boundaries.
Okay.
Let your teenager know that underage drinking is unacceptable
Right.
and that there will be consequences.
If they violate those rules.
And they violate those rules
Okay, so setting those ground rules early on
is crucial.
and being consistent.
And being consistent, don't waver.
Don't make exceptions.
Don't make exceptions.
Okay, anything else?
Discuss the risks associated with alcohol use.
So not just lectures about intoxication
Right.
and bad choices,
But the potential for addiction and long-term health problems.
and create a safe environment for them to come to you
Yes.
if they do make a mistake
Absolutely. Let them know that they can come to you without fear of judgment.
or excessive punishment.
Exactly. That builds trust and open communication.
Okay, so we've talked about alcohol, prescription drugs.
Mm-hmm.
What about vaping?
Vaping, the new kid on the block.
It seems like it's everywhere these days.
It is. It's a relatively new phenomenon.
And it's become a major concern
Major concern.
among teenagers.
Yes,
It's marketed as a safer alternative to cigarettes.
it is.
But is that true?
Well, the research is still ongoing, but what we're seeing so far suggests that vaping is not harmless.
So those sleek devices and those alluring flavors,
Might be concealing some serious health risks.
they might. Okay.
Vaping involves inhaling a mix of chemicals.
Including,
Nicotine.
which is
Ah.
highly addictive. Highly addictive. And we know that nicotine can negatively impact the developing teenage brain.
It can interfere with attention memory learning.
So even if vaping doesn't lead to conventional smoking,
It's still detrimental.
that's still a problem.
Yeah, and we're seeing these really high vaping rates among teenagers.
It's become a social norm,
It has.
even surpassing traditional cigarettes in popularity.
And I think part of that is because of the marketing tactics
Okay.
that vaping companies use.
How so?
They often target young people with these enticing flavors and these sleek designs.
So they're being deliberately lured into this potentially addictive habit.
It's a big concern.
It is. So parents need to be proactive
I do.
in addressing vaping with their teenagers.
Absolutely.
So how do we start that conversation?
Well, first, educate yourself.
About,
Vaping.
okay.
Understand the risks.
Hmm.
Understand the marketing strategies.
Okay, so arm ourselves with the facts
Yes.
before we go into that conversation.
Absolutely. And then talk to your teenager openly and honestly
About,
about the potential dangers of vaping.
and establish clear expectations.
Right.
Vaping like smoking is unacceptable.
Exactly.
Okay. Um, we've talked about alcohol, drugs,
Yep.
vaping.
Mm-hmm.
Let's talk about navigating sexuality during adolescence.
Okay.
It can be a very confusing and multifaceted experience.
It can with all those hormones, the societal pressures,
Right.
all the misinformation out there.
So much misinformation.
Mhm.
So what are some of the challenges that are unique to teenagers today
Okay.
compared to when we were growing up?
Well, one of the big shifts is the rise of online dating apps and social media.
Okay.
Obviously, these platforms provide new avenues for connection,
Right.
relationship exploration,
Right.
but they also introduce new risks.
So while they facilitate connection,
Right.
they also create opportunities for exploitation and unhealthy relationships.
Unfortunately, yes.
So parents need to be aware of how their teenagers are using these platforms and have those open conversations about online safety and healthy relationships.
Absolutely.
Okay. So what are some of the specific topics that parents should be addressing with their teenagers when it comes to sex and relationships?
Well, I think consent is absolutely paramount.
Consent.
Making sure that teenagers have clear and accurate information about consent,
Okay.
about healthy boundaries,
Mhm.
about what constitutes sexual assault.
Right. We need to dispel those harmful myths
We do.
surrounding sex and relationships,
Sure.
promoting respect,
Yes.
equality,
Yeah.
open communication.
Absolutely.
Those are all key. And we also can't ignore the influence of pornography,
Right.
which is more accessible now than ever before.
It is.
So how does pornography impact teenagers' understanding of healthy sexuality?
Well, it can distort their perceptions
Okay.
of what healthy sexuality and relationships look like.
Right.
Because often pornography portrays these unrealistic scenarios
Sure.
and harmful power dynamics.
So it might not align with reality,
It might not.
and that can lead to confusion
Confusion.
and unhealthy expectations.
Exactly.
And research suggests that early exposure to pornography can actually have negative consequences.
It can.
So those seemingly harmless online explorations.
It can have lasting repercussions.
Okay, so parents need to be proactive
They do.
in discussing pornography with their teenagers.
Absolutely.
How do we broach this sensitive subject?
We'll start by having those open and honest conversations about sexuality and relationships in general.
Okay.
Create that safe space
Where they feel comfortable.
where they feel comfortable asking questions,
sharing their thoughts.
sharing their thoughts.
And we can't avoid addressing pornography directly.
We can't.
Explain the potential dangers.
Yes.
Help them understand how it can distort their perceptions of healthy relationships.
Exactly.
And we need to be mindful of our own media consumption.
We do. Teenagers are watching us.
They're always watching us.
Whoa.
Okay, so what's the takeaway for parents when it comes to risk-taking behavior in teenagers?
Well, I think the big takeaway is to recognize that risk-taking is a normal part of adolescence.
It is.
But our job as parents is to guide them
Towards
healthy, informed decision-making.
So it's about striking that balance between allowing them to explore and providing them with the knowledge and skills they need to stay safe.
Exactly. It's an ongoing process
It is.
that requires open communication.
Trust
Yeah,
and a willingness to have those tough conversations.
absolutely.
Okay, so parenting teenagers.
It's challenging,
It is.
but it's also incredibly rewarding.
It is.
And I think by understanding the complexities of adolescence,
Right.
we can really help them navigate this phase successfully.
And emerge as confident, capable,
Well-rounded individuals.
well-rounded individuals. And that's what we all want, right?
That's the goal.
So we've explored a lot of the challenges of adolescence.
We have.
But let's shift gears now and talk about how we can best equip teenagers for a successful transition into adulthood.
Okay, sounds good.
What are those essential elements in raising a well-rounded individual?
Well, that's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
It is.
There's no one-size-fits-all answer.
Right.
But research does point to a few key factors.
Okay, great. So let's dive into those. Obviously, education is often seen as a bedrock of future success.
Sure.
But is academic achievement really the sole path
No.
to a fulfilling life?
I don't think so. And Gosling actually reminds us that the traditional education system
Okay.
doesn't really work for everyone.
It doesn't cater to every individual's strengths or
Exactly.
learning styles.
Some people might thrive in a more hands-on environment.
Right.
Others might need a more creative outlet.
So a teenager who maybe struggles with standardized tests
Right.
or those traditional classroom settings,
They might excel in other areas.
they might, okay, so it's not a one-size-fits-all
No, it's not.
approach.
Uh-huh.
Okay, so education is important,
It is.
but it's not the only measure of success.
It's not the be-all and end-all.
So what other attributes contribute to a well-rounded individual?
Well, I think responsibility is a big one.
Responsibility, okay.
Teenagers who develop that sense of ownership
Okay.
for their actions and their choices
Mm-hmm.
are much better equipped to deal with the complexities of adult life.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
So how do we cultivate that sense of responsibility?
Well, by giving them opportunities to make decisions,
Okay.
take ownership of tasks,
Okay.
experience the natural consequences
Of their choices.
of their choices.
So chores aren't just about a tidy house.
No, they're about character development.
They are, okay, so those seemingly mundane tasks,
Hmm.
like laundry, dishwashing, yard work,
All of that.
they can actually teach some valuable life skills.
They can.
Okay, like time management,
Yeah.
problem solving, self-reliance.
It's about instilling that work ethic
Okay.
and a sense of contribution to a shared space.
What about part-time employment?
Great question.
How does that play into a teenager's growth?
Well, I think holding a part-time job can be incredibly beneficial. Obviously, it goes beyond just earning, spending money.
Yeah.
It teaches them about responsibility, accountability,
Mm.
the value of hard work.
And it exposes them to a different social setting.
It does.
Right, they're interacting with adults outside of their family and school circles.
Exactly. They're broadening their horizons,
Okay.
developing those interpersonal skills that are so important
For any field.
for any field.
Okay, so even just a few hours a week at a local establishment
Right.
can provide some really invaluable learning experiences.
It can.
Okay, great. Along with responsibility,
Mm-hmm.
I imagine self-control is another important ingredient
It is a crucial one.
for navigating adulthood successfully.
Absolutely. That ability to delay gratification,
Right.
resist those impulses.
Stay focused on those long-term goals.
Exactly. And studies have shown that teenagers who develop strong self-control
Okay.
are more likely to have successful relationships, thrive in their careers,
Yeah.
make healthier choices overall.
So those who can resist procrastination or those impulsive indulgences,
They're setting themselves up for success.
they're setting themselves up. Okay, so how can we help our teenagers develop this self-control?
Well, it starts with setting those clear expectations and boundaries.
Okay.
You know, teenagers need consistent rules and guidelines
To learn self-regulation.
to learn self-regulation.
It's not about being overly strict,
Right.
but providing that structure.
Structure and predictability.
Okay.
Encourage them to set personal goals and work towards them.
So whether it's saving up for something they want or improving their grades,
Exactly.
those aspirations can help them exercise self-control,
Absolutely. And celebrate their accomplishments along the way.
right? Even the small ones.
Even the small ones.
That positive reinforcement can really go a long way.
It can.
Okay, so it's about acknowledging their efforts and highlighting those benefits of delaying gratification.
For sure.
Now, along with responsibility and self-control, I think empathy is another crucial quality for a well-rounded individual.
Absolutely. Empathy, that ability to understand
share
and share the feelings of others.
is so important
It's increasingly important in our world.
in our interconnected world.
It's easy to get caught up in our own little bubbles.
Right.
But empathy is essential for building strong relationships, resolving conflicts peacefully,
Right.
contributing to a more just and compassionate society.
So how do we cultivate empathy in teenagers who are often, grappling with their own very intense emotions?
Well, I think it starts with us.
Okay.
We need to model empathy
In our own interactions.
in our own interactions.
Teenagers are always watching,
They are. They're always observing how we treat others.
especially those who are different from us.
Exactly. So if we're dismissive or judgmental,
They're likely to pick up on that.
they will.
Okay, so create opportunities for them to engage with people
Yes.
from diverse backgrounds,
Different experiences.
different experiences, right?
Yeah.
Whether that's through community involvement, Or just simply engaging in conversations with people.
Who hold different viewpoints.
Different viewpoints.
Exactly.
And don't underestimate the power of storytelling.
Oh, storytelling is so important.
Right. Books, movies, real-life anecdotes
All of that.
can help teenagers step into the shoes of others.
And develop that deeper understanding.
Of human experience.
To human experiences.
So it's about cultivating that emotional intelligence.
Yes.
Recognizing our shared humanity.
Absolutely. Empathy is such a valuable quality.
It is.
That will benefit them throughout their lives.
Okay, let's talk about critical thinking.
Oh.
Another crucial skill.
The crucial skill.
For navigating today's world.
Especially in this age of information overload.
Right. They need to be able to discern fact from fiction. Form their own informed opinions.
Be critical consumers of information.
Right. Not just passive recipients.
Exactly.
Okay, so how do we foster critical thinking in teenagers?
Encourage them to ask questions, challenge assumptions, consider different perspectives.
So instead of shutting down their inquiries
Right.
or imposing our views on them,
We want them to explore.
we want them to explore ideas and reach their own conclusions.
Exactly. And I think it's important to model critical thinking ourselves.
So show them how we evaluate information.
Right.
Weigh evidence.
Make informed decisions.
Right. Demonstrate that intellectual curiosity.
Yes.
And a willingness to question the status quo.
Exactly.
And don't forget about mentors.
Oh, mentors can be so valuable.
Right. Those positive adult role models outside the family.
Can offer a different perspective.
Okay. Those relationships can be really transformative.
You think?
Okay. As teenagers prepare for adulthood, I think it's also important to remember that making mistakes
Is inevitable.
it's inevitable. It's part of growth.
It's part of growth.
Right.
So instead of trying to protect them from every misstep,
Okay.
we should create an environment where they feel safe to experiment.
Okay.
Make those mistakes.
And learn.
And learn from them. Right.
Provide that safety net.
Exactly.
Knowing that they have our support.
They need to know they're not alone.
Even when they falter.
Even when they mess up.
And I think we need to reframe our perception of mistakes.
I agree.
They're not failures.
No, there are opportunities.
Opportunities for growth and learning.
Exactly.
It's about fostering that growth mindset
Yes.
where challenges are seen as opportunities for development.
Exactly. And that mindset will serve them well.
Throughout their life.
Throughout their lives.
Okay, well, this has been an incredible deep dive.
It has been.
We've covered so much.
We have.
From the biological and social changes of adolescence to those essential skills and qualities.
That help prepare them for adulthood.
What's your final takeaway for our listeners?
Well, I think adolescence is such a dynamic
It is.
and transformative period.
Filled with both hurdles
And opportunities.
and by understanding the complexities of this stage.
I think we can better support teenagers.
As they navigate this journey.
And emerge as confident
Capable
and well-rounded individuals.
Beautifully said. And to our listeners, thank you for joining us on this exploration into the world of teenagers. We trust you've gained some valuable insights and perhaps a renewed appreciation for the teenagers in your life. Until next time, keep diving deep.